allies.
For more perspective on this, joining me now is Whiton, an author and also the former State Department senior advisor. Thank you so much, Christian, for being with us tonight.
Great to be here, Jamie. Thanks.
Let me start by asking you this. I get the sense from your comments previously that you believe that this is really a deliberate action of aggression by Putin. How long do you think he was planning this?
It probably came together. The military part may have only come together after the pro-Moscow prime minister of Ukraine was forced from power by protesters. But he's been working on undermining Ukraine really since 2004, when a people power revolution swept Yanukovych from power the first time and swept in pro-Western reformers. Unfortunately, since that time, Putin has been using a number of weapons of coercion, especially energy. Ukraine is dependent for about 70% of its natural gas from Russia, and Putin has wielded that very astutely, used it to undermine reformists, get Yanukovych back in power. Of course, that has failed in this instance, and he's resorted to his more lethal weapon, the army.
In the past, Putin has turned off the valve, so to speak, cutting off that supply to Ukraine. They are a vulnerable area financially. He knows all of this. What's his end game?
Well, ultimately, like a lot of strongmen or dictators, if you will, they need something to justify their power. And whipping up nationalism is a great way to do it. Putin has said repeatedly that he thought the breakup of the USSR was a terrible thing. He wants to recreate that. He refers to as near abroad. So anyone who is former USSR, Putin tends to look at as a fake country. In fact, he told George W. Bush that Ukraine, in his view, was a fake country. And so, whipping up nationalism, going in and saying that you're going to protect Russians in Ukraine. The Russians in Ukraine were just fine, and they would be fine under the new government there. That is, an excuse to go in a flimsy one, and one that Europe should say is a flimsy excuse. Finally, some of the verbiage has gotten a little tougher coming out of Europe and coming out of the Obama administration, but not that tough. And frankly, this administration has no credibility because it's drawn red lines before in places like Syria. It said we're going to take actions in places like Libya when our ambassador was killed, and it hasn't followed through.
Well, look at this situation. And the critics are saying that we're not being strong enough. The Obama administration is not being strong enough. So my question is, do you think this is a lack of foreign policy, a lack of a plan for these types of incidents? They sort of take a wait-and-see approach, or do you think it's just a failure in leadership?
I think it's just a lack of an overall strategy. I mean, ask what the strategy is, the U.S. strategy on Russia or the Middle East or anywhere else, and I think anyone would be hard-pressed to say, and it's not that hard. We're often presented with this false choice between doing nothing and the softest of diplomacy or going to war, and there's a lot we can do. We can start, in this case, by kicking Russia out of the G8 and the WTO. Those weren't meant to be reformatories. You're supposed to act a certain way to be in those international organizations. We should use financial tools against Putin. We should charge him with war crimes. He staged a war of aggression. We hung people at Nuremberg for doing what he just did. And then longer term, we could free Central Europe from its reliance on Russian oil. They're the rudiments of some of the infrastructure there for pipelines and gas terminals that would not be dependent on Russia. Poland's foreign minister said they may even buy natural gas from the United States if we could just, export Keystone and some of the regulatory issues here. We could change dynamic, but as you indicated, it would require a bit of leadership.
Now, we're coming up in the second half of this show. We're going to talk a little bit about that leadership and what needs to happen on that issue and others. Whiton, always great to speak to you. Thank you for your